Welcome to the Manga Bay Newscast. I am your host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's front line. I am filling in for your regular host, Mike Galrecki, who is on paternity leave, but shall return in a couple of months. This week, I'm speaking with Mexico City-based journalist and Manga Bay staff writer covering Latin America, Max Radwin. I spoke with Max about a massive infrastructure project stretching across Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula called the Tren Maya, known in English as the Maya Train, a multi-billion-dollar tourist train line that is 1,525 kilometers or 958 miles long. We talked about its origins and the fixation Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also known as AMLO, has with getting it completed, which has entailed lengthy court battles due to the injunctions filed against it for the ecological destruction it would cause and the displacement of many, many families directly in the line of its construction. We talked about the different types of civil suits, 25 of which were filed in the 5 states this line crosses: Quintana Roo, Yucatan, Tabasco, Campeche, and Chiapas. We spoke not just about the immediate environmental and social consequences of this project, but also about the long-term degradation to the environment and additional stresses that a line like this would place on already heavily burdened tourist destinations, such as Tulum. We also touch upon the Mexican government's general approach to infrastructure and how this is being received by the people that voted AMLO into office and the public in general. And finally, he gives us a brief preview of a few infrastructure stories he's working on in Chile and Bolivia. So, Max, tell us, what is the Maya Train project and why is it being built?
The Maya Train is an approximately 950-mile rail line that is being built in the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico, and it's going to connect 5 states: Quintana Roo, Yucatan, Tabasco, Campeche, Chiapas, and it's costing about $9 billion. That price keeps going up as they build. And it's being built mostly because of its economic upsides, tourism specifically. So right now, if you were to take a vacation to the Yucatan Peninsula, you would fly into Cancun, you would have to rent a car, you would have to figure out some sort of shuttle service or a bus if you wanted to go down to Tulum. Maybe you go to Siancan, you go to some beaches, you might make it out to Calakmul National Park. All of that is going to be a lot easier if there's a rail line. I've done some reporting in those areas, and a lot of these small towns in the Yucatan Peninsula have great archaeological sites. They've got rainforests, they've got cenotes, there's a lot to see, but the towns themselves are pretty small, they're kind of underdeveloped. There's, a couple restaurants, maybe 1 or 2 hotels that are really more like hostels. So the types of people that are attracted to those places are backpackers, or hitchhikers. You're not getting a lot of families with young children or maybe older couples. All of those kinds of demographics are going to be able to take day trips out to a lot of these different places now. And then with those tourists comes other development. If there's an influx of tourism to these small towns, you're going to start to see more restaurants and more roads and more hotels and things. So the idea is that if you can connect all of these places that have a lot of cultural value or touristic value, that the economy is going to grow very rapidly throughout the region. The line is also going to serve as a cargo line. That's the other big thing. And then the third reason that it's being built is less economic and more political, and that is that AMLO just loves trains. He really loves infrastructure. He's kind of an old school guy. And he sees this train as his legacy. So he's kind of doing everything that he can to push it through because it really seems like he wants to be remembered for this project, among other mega infrastructure projects, but this one is sort of his baby.
And what kind of impacts are we looking at on wildlife and ecosystems and the people that inhabit these places?
So you have to remember that there are 7 sections of this train and it's crossing 5 different states. So the impact is a little different in each part. Some of the ecosystems aren't even the same. In some places we're talking about rainforests, and other places we're talking about cenotes and underground waterways and caves and things like that. But in general, the impact, I guess you could say, is fragmentation of habitats, the destruction of entire habitats in some places. The best way to understand the impacts is to look at what sorts of lawsuits are being filed, because those lawsuits are being filed by organizations representing people on the ground.
And can you break down some examples of those lawsuits? And given those lawsuits, how likely is this project to move forward?
So there are really three big categories of lawsuits. Obviously, there are dozens and dozens, and they each have their own, specifics. But in general, one type of lawsuit is damage to the environment. So there's deforestation happening that is not supposed to be happening. There's an environmental study that says that deforestation would not take place, and it is taking place. That's a big one. And then also concerns about the destruction of cenotes and caves and underground water systems and things like that, especially along Line 5. Those are the two big things for the environment. And then the second type of lawsuit has to do with prior consultation. So our listeners are probably familiar. If you're going to build something near an indigenous or local community, you have to consult that community about how the project is going to impact their way of life, whether that be the environment or economic opportunities or building new roads or affecting them in some other way, relocating them, drawing in a lot of outsiders. And those consultations did not happen or allegedly happened inadequately. So in some cases, the meetings that took place with residents was not in their first language, and so a lot of people didn't understand what was being explained to them, or there weren't enough meetings, or the meetings weren't advertised enough. So you have 2 or 3 meetings throughout a month, and people don't hear about it. It's not actually working the way it legally is supposed to be working. So a lot of people are surprised by what's happening because the consultation process was not adequately carried out, or they never had an opportunity to voice their opinion. There are some unsubstantiated claims from legitimate sources that are being worked out right now about some people being paid off to support the project, paid to spread propaganda and things like that. But that's still sort of up in the air right now. The third type of lawsuit has to do with relocation. So this is eminent domain, right? This is a public project. It's being overseen by the tourism board and also the military, among other government agencies. So public project, your house is in the way, we are going to relocate you. And in theory, the idea is we will give you some amount of financial compensation, and we will give you a house of equal or greater value. And the problem with that is that a lot of these houses are allegedly not of equal or greater value. The materials are worse, the materials are different. Also, you have to think that there are a lot of indigenous communities in this area. So if you move them off of land that they probably have inhabited for a very long time, you're dealing with cultural loss, generational loss, emotional, personal loss, and it's kind of hard to quantify those things. So there are a lot of lawsuits right now trying to figure out, was there a wrong done here or not?
Just some brief context here. In Max's article, he wrote about a $771 million section of the railway that had to be rerouted in Campeche due to the backlash it received, as it would have had to displace 300 families. However, a lawyer representing communities in Campeche told Mongabay some communities are too afraid to fight back against the government asking them to move. So, Max, you mentioned that 25 injunctions have been filed against different sections of the project by civil society organizations in many states, and this temporarily halted construction in some spots. Do you have any updates on some of those delays?
Yeah, so earlier this month for Line 5, work had stopped for a while to deal with some environmental concerns that were expressed in these lawsuits, but the government did something that it had done with previous lines, which is to announce that the train is a matter of national security. And when you make that claim, it allows you to kind of throw out some of those concerns and to bypass a lot of regulations. Now, whether a train that is meant for tourism and cargo is actually a matter of national security is, I suppose, up for debate. They try to make some claims about organized crime and human trafficking in the area, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because Yucatan is one of the safer areas. I mean, it really reads politically as a loophole, like just a way to continue construction. So if I had to bet, I would say that this project is going to move forward no matter what. The government is going to keep finding loopholes. It's going to keep revising the actual route of the train every time it runs into issues. There have been a couple issues or a couple locations in later stages of the train where they realize, actually, this is way too complicated. We can't build here. This is creating way too many legal issues or logistical issues. Let's just move it somewhere else. So in general, I would say it doesn't really matter what this project is going to confront. It's going to keep moving forward.
So how does this infrastructure project fit into the overall infrastructure plans of the country and of the Yucatan Peninsula?
So I would say that this project is pretty emblematic of the government's current approach to infrastructure, under AMLO anyway. As I said earlier, AMLO he's kind of an old school guy. He appeals a lot to nostalgia, and there's this kind of general sense that he wants to return Mexico to some kind of a glory days that aren't really defined. It's kind of like Trump in that sense, he says make America great again, but you don't know when America was great. I mean, I'm not saying that they're the same type of leader, but there's definitely a political strategy there that is the same. And so a lot of these infrastructure projects are kind of these Don Quixotean dreams that work better on paper than they actually do in reality. And the Maya train, I think, is a good example because it sounds amazing. It's being built on this old abandoned railroad from, I believe, the 1800s. And so there's this sense, the Maya train is... we're resurrecting this old great version of Mexico. And a lot of his other projects are similar. I mean, there's the airport that was built in Mexico City, the second airport in Mexico City that doesn't really have any flights. It wasn't really a necessary project. The previous government had started building a different airport. AMLO scrapped that one so he could build his own, and now no one's flying in or out of it. So it just kind of is a very memeable kind of joke in Mexico right now that, what is the point of this airport and why did the government spend so much money on it?
For additional context, when the airport named Felipe Angeles International Airport after General Felipe Angeles opened earlier this year, it only had 16 flights and served around 2,000 passengers. It is also 27 miles from the city, making it a far more arduous trek for anyone seeking to use it coming from the city.
I've never flown out of it. I've never had to drive there. It's got to be at least 45 minutes to an hour, whereas the other airport, which is a 2-terminal airport, I mean, at most it takes 20 minutes to a half hour with traffic. So it's far away and unnecessary. It's a very hollow project.
The original airport design started by the previous Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, was intended to be built much closer to the city, albeit on a swampy landscape that may have had billions in maintenance fees. To date, however, only one international flight to Venezuela departs from Felipe Angeles International Airport, but the government wants to serve 2.3 million passengers by year's end.
And then I was just going to talk about other examples. I mean, there's a lot of other examples. There's the interoceanic corridor is passing from Oaxaca and Veracruz, which is the narrowest part of the country. The idea is that it's going to compete with the Panama Canal. And there's been some complaints from local communities, but it's a very complex project, and I don't think in general the media has found a way to cover it efficiently. It's kind of a wonky thing, but it definitely has issues, and it also kind of is something that every government has tried for decades and decades and not really managed to finish, and AMLO's really pushing for that. And then you've got a rail line between Toluca and Mexico City that's had accidents and other things. I don't want to say that every project that AMLO does is somehow doomed or ridiculous, because I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure that Mexico needs. So some of it is justified. It's just that he keeps putting himself in a position where it's kind of embarrassing at the end, and also, he's the first leftist president in 6 or 7 decades, and he really campaigned on an idea of changing a corrupt system and caring about human rights and caring about local communities and the environment, and he just has done none of that. And he had a very strong support base from young Mexicans, and a lot of them are quite disappointed with the way he's run his government.
I've had the privilege of visiting Quintana Roo on a couple of occasions, and I remember hearing from the folks in Tulum and Cozumel, and also people who had visited these places in years past, tell me that in the past 20 years, the influx of tourism has exploded, and these areas barely resemble what they did just a couple decades ago. What are they going to look like if this rail line goes ahead, especially in Tulum, which is an area that doesn't have waste management or mostly any access to the power grid, and much of its resorts are powered on diesel generators. Can that sustain the increase in tourism that this rail line would bring?
I mean, it can, but the question is at what cost? And I think right now the conversation people have about the Maya train is what impact is the construction having, which is an important question, right? And we've talked about some of that. But if you look 5 years down the road, 10 years, 15 years, and so on, the train brings tourists, and the tourists bring additional development. Again, if you have an influx of tourists to what was previously a very small town with maybe one cave or one archaeological site, 2 restaurants, and a hotel, it's going to need to triple that infrastructure. There are going to be roads built off of the actual train stations that lead to other things that tourists can see, right? So this is just going to keep growing and growing and growing.
As of 2019, Tulum alone was generating $9 billion a year, and along with that, also up to 100 tons of solid waste each day. And sanitation remains a currently unsolved problem for the Maya Riviera destination, threatening to contaminate its vast system of underground rivers.
And even in areas where you don't have protected areas, you still have really vital biodiversity, really important rainforests and other things. So it's pretty troubling when you think about the long-term impact. And unfortunately, I don't think the government is thinking about that because, again, there's just so much economic upside, and that's more important to them, to the government.
So, Max, you're covering more infrastructure projects in Bolivia and Chile. Can you share some details about what you're looking into?
Yeah, sure. So it's slightly different than the Maya train, although there are some overlaps. I'll be taking a nice long reporting trip here in September, going to south central Chile to look at a hydroelectric dam in Rucalwe. I'm very excited about going there because it's the first place I ever reported internationally as a journalist about a different dam that had been constructed there. And so I'm hoping to look at the short-term impact of this new dam that's being built, but also look at the continual promise the government makes of we're going to stop damming this river, we're going to stop damming. I promise this is the last dam that we're going to build, and they just keep building more dams. Some of them are mini hydro, some of them are massive. So it's kind of a slow-motion car crash happening there. I'll be talking to a lot of Mapuche and Pehuenche residents and getting their perspective. So that should be really interesting. And then from there, I'm going to Bolivia, and I'll be looking at gold mining, mostly illegal gold mining happening in Madidi National Park and around Madidi National Park, as well as how the mercury trade works, because you need mercury to mine a lot of this gold. So we're hoping to find out a lot of information about where the mercury comes from and how that illicit market supports or props up gold mining in that forest. And then I'm going to drop down south for a few days and talk to some residents about how the lithium mining is impacting their way of life. So lots of good stuff on the horizon, lots of infrastructure. Yeah, should be good.
Are you doing any follow-up coverage on the Maya train in the years ahead?
So with Manga Bay LatAm, we have done a lot of interviews on Line 5. We just haven't gotten the article out yet. We've talked a lot about the updates in this episode, though. But you can look for that article. And so Line 6 and 7 haven't really been started. So that's kind of what's on the horizon, probably. I don't know the actual timeline for those sections of the train, but you can expect us to cover that when tenders are granted and they start clearing the path and things like that. So we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
Max, thank you so much for joining me today on the newscast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
If you're interested to read Max's coverage on the Maya train, you can find his articles listed in the show notes of this podcast. Make sure to also read Manga Bay's Q&A with writer and poet Pedro Ucbe about the Maya train and its impact, conducted by Thelma Gomez Duran, titled, "What's Lacking is Respect for Mayan Culture." If you enjoy the Manga Bay Newscast, we ask that you please help spread the word by telling a friend. That is the best way to help expand our reach and keep growing. And another way to help is by becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/mangabay. We are a non-profit news outlet, so just $1 per month will really help us offset the production costs and hosting fees. And if you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Frontline, head to patreon.com/mangabay to learn more and support the Manga Bay Newscast. That's patreon.com/mangabay. You and your friends can join the listeners who have downloaded the Manga Bay Newscast nearly 500,000 times by subscribing to this podcast wherever you get podcasts from, or you can download our app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either app store for the Manga Bay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all of our previous episodes. And of course, you can read all of our news and inspiration from Nature's Frontline at mangabay.com. Or if you prefer to keep up with us on social media, follow us at facebook.com/mangabay or on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where our handle is at mangabay on all 3 platforms. Thanks, as always, for listening to the Manga Bay Newscast. I am your interim host, Mike DiGirolamo, filling in for your regular host, Mike Gorecki. I'll see you next time.